I went back to working in the NHS a little while ago to see the reality on the ground for patients when it comes to GLP-1 medications, because there's what we think should be happening and there's what's actually happening in reality. And there are three big things that have shocked me that I think people need to be aware of. So the first one is that we all know the criteria to get hold of GLP-1s in the NHS is far tighter than even the MHRA or manufacturer's guidance. You need a BMI of 40 plus and certain health issues, and only if you hit these criteria can you get the medication. The reason the criteria are so tight is because the NHS does not have the money to fund these medications for everyone. But even if you hit these criteria, you still might not be able to get hold of them. In our area, the practice that I'm currently working at has given me permission to disclose this, but the practice has been asked to take patients off GLP-1s who've been put on them because they hit the criteria, who no longer hit the criteria, because they've lost weight and improved, because they don't have the money to fund the medication, not even for the small number of patients right now who qualify for it. So when people keep asking me, how long do you think it will be before people with a lower BMI but still high BMI will be able to get hold of these medications, I don't know. And also it's going to be a postcode lottery as to if you can get them at all. So things like this are happening and it's incredibly frustrating, and the GPs at my practice were very keen for me to share this because they want to help their patients. They want to be able to prescribe these medications, but they can only prescribe what they're allowed to prescribe and what we have the funding to provide. That brings me to the second issue, which is all about the prescription itself. So as I've just said, a lot of people who can benefit from GLP-1s can't actually get them through the NHS. And so they're going into the private sector, they're using online pharmacies, they're filling in all their details on an online form, they're giving their GP details, the pharmacy's then taking their money and sending them the prescription. The pharmacy then contacts your NHS GP, sends them a letter and says, this patient is getting this medication from us, can you check it's appropriate for them? And so NHS GPs are then having to trawl through so many patient notes every day, checking is this medication appropriate for this patient. There is no additional funding for this workload. And when we know about 2 million people in the UK taking GLP-1s, it's a huge workload. And there's no additional time, there's no additional staff, but that's not the issue. As a GP, you get these letters through, you read them, you read the patient's notes, and it's not unusual to find patients who shouldn't be on these medications. So then as the GP, you're having to contact the patient to find out what's going on. So this is generating and using up more appointments. And during that consultation, the GP is then having to seek consent from the patient to say, can I contact the pharmacy and let them know this is not appropriate for you? And guess what? Some of those patients who are seeking these medications inappropriately are saying, no, I don't give my consent. And so you then have a huge patient safety issue. And this has been a big thing for a few of my colleagues over the last year or so. And what the GP does in this situation is contact their medical indemnifier and ask, well, how should they proceed in this situation? And so the indemnifier's advice has been somewhat variable, but this is an article online. And I bring your attention to this because I've been made aware of some chats online where some people who are obtaining these medications inappropriately or fraudulently are informing others that actually your GP can't say anything. I've seen that come up in chats, but your GP can do something about it. Even if you don't give consent, your GP can inform the pharmacy that you have a contraindication, which means a reason you shouldn't be on the medication. You're not able to disclose what it is, but that is the status quo. So I raise this in today's video to make people aware that the GP, even if you don't consent to disclosing what the reason is, can inform the pharmacy that there's a reason that you shouldn't have the medication. Ultimately, the whole reason for having a prescription wall preventing people from directly being able to buy these medications is to protect patients. And what we're essentially seeing is a divorcing of responsibility from people being able to make money and dispense these medications, and then dumping all that responsibility and stress and time on an already overburdened NHS. That brings me to the third point, which is the way we deliver healthcare in the UK right now is changing. And increasingly more and more patients are going into the private sector as the NHS is not able to meet their needs. It is incredibly frustrating as an NHS doctor to be referring into services with a 12-month waiting list. One of my biggest areas of frustration in the NHS is the way that we treat mental health. In mental health, what often happens is we see patients, we don't have adequate time, our 7 minutes in general practice, to really get into things with them. The local services can be booked up or just not appropriate for that patient. And so often that patient ends up with a pill, which isn't the best thing for actually treating what's going on with them, because not everyone with mental health conditions is the same. And the exact same thing is happening with GLP-1s, because everyone who struggles with their weight is not the same, and different people need different strategies and different management plans. So we're not actually getting to the root cause of the issue. And if you don't understand where the obesities come from, if you're somebody who, as doctors don't receive training in obesity, so doctors have the same beliefs as the general population, and many people do have significant weight stigma. They think everyone who's overweight just can't manage their food, or is lazy, or disinterested. If you have those beliefs and we don't fully understand how GLP-1s work, how you titrate that dose and approach that topic is going to be very different to somebody who has the understanding. I speak to a lot of patients whose doctors are just whacking up the dose every month, or just saying to them, what dose do you want? Let's do that. Because they're not actually having the proper conversation about what are you doing on this dose? How are you feeling on this dose? What are your behaviours like on this dose? There's so much more to it. To give you an example, somebody who, say, has a background of neurodivergence where they really struggle with executive function, yeah, they might actually get some benefit on that executive function with their GLP-1, but still there's other things we need to do alongside the GLP-1 to really address why they're overweight in the first place. The GLP-1 will help, but we can maximize their benefit without having to crank up their dose by doing other things. And most GPs wouldn't know where to start with that, which is appropriate and fine, because not every GP can know everything, but we need to give at least a basic level of training to try and weed out that stigma, to get doctors to approach patients who are overweight with understanding of even just the fact that they don't know why they're overweight, and also try and help people as individuals. It is difficult, because I've spoken to GPs who say, I don't feel like I'm the best person for these medications, but where do I send someone? We don't have any local services, which I get. That's why I created a clinic around a need that I felt that there was. But it is frustrating in the NHS because not everyone can afford a clinic. And I know some of you are going to say, why don't you just make it cheaper? The insurance, just my insurance alone to open the clinic, is 5 figures. That is how expensive it is to practice as a doctor in the private sector. Costs are high because it costs so much to actually open the clinic. That's not going to be accessible for everyone, and doctors can't afford to open clinics that are accessible because of all the costs. So those are my 3 main sticking points when it comes to GLP-1s and the NHS. I think so many GPs would welcome some training in weight management, some actually useful training in obesity, and hopefully that will come through at some point. When it comes to funding and rolling these medications out more, I don't know when that's going to happen. When we're already struggling, when so few patients are actually able to get hold of them on the NHS right now, how realistic is it that that rollout will continue? Hopefully it will, because I think this is a long-term investment. Helping people to reduce their weight now will help to reduce long-term complications from that obesity, but I don't think the NHS necessarily uses common sense when it comes to a lot of the decisions that it makes, having worked as a clinician and in the back office over the last 20 years in the NHS. So yes, that is it for today's video. If you have had any great experiences on the NHS with your GLP-1s, please do share. It is not my ambition to be very negative. It is my ambition to be very realistic. And so I do hope things improve. It would be wonderful. And I do think these medications can help a lot of people.